Hello everybody, it is Nicole from iiKiui and welcome to another elemental video. Today we are doing the poison elemental, so let's go ahead and get started. I also want to talk about how I deal with mistakes in this video, only because at the end of this video, or near the end, there's a lot of me trying to fix a mistake that leads to a completely different drawing, so I thought that it would be interesting to include and also fitting. So let's go over the idea and concept first. So the original poison elemental was a scientist, and she was kind of like part snake, and the color scheme was more on the purple side than the green side. And she actually was probably one of my favorite elementals from the previous series, so changing her out completely was pretty challenging. So this time I made her more snake-like, and I tried to incorporate different ideas of poison. So she's a snake, which some snakes are venomous, and then there's poison ivy on the tail, poison apples in her hand, which are kind of representative of Snow White. She has some bones between her tail, which represents the death by poison, and her hair is also poison. I feel like I'm probably going to say the word poison a lot in this video. So when I was doing the design, I referenced snakes for the scales and poison ivy to make sure that they looked accurate. And the snake scales were actually pretty challenging because of the pattern, and I'm not really used to drawing snake scales anyways, so using a lot of reference really helps to get that pattern down. Now for the coloring, I started with this kind of muddy green for the hair and body, and then a kind of muddy yellow for the inner part of the scales. A lot of the beginning really focuses on the hair and the body because all I was doing was trying to build up color and contrast, and that's basically the beginnings of watercolor. So like I said, I just worked on the body and hair a lot, trying to build up the color and the contrast in both places. I mixed in a muddy brown and a purple to create this poison, like sewer water look. I think it made it look pretty gross, so that was the whole point. However, you probably won't see it like this again, so you'll understand what I'm saying when I get farther along. I also added red for the apples for contrast because green and red are complementary, and then I added gold for the scales, and then I thought that gold could represent money because money can sometimes be poison depending on how you view it or how you use it. So now let's go ahead and talk about where the mistakes started. So I used a Winsor watercolor marker, which I reviewed recently, and one of the colors was this kind of lime green that I thought was pretty fitting because it was almost like the iconic poison color. However, when I used the fine tip of the marker, it turned out to be a completely different green than I was expecting. It looked almost more blue-green than the yellow-green that I wanted and that was supposed to be in this marker. So when I added it into the smoke, it completely changed how the whole image looked. So after I found out about that mistake, I used the other side, which was the more lime green side that I wanted, and I colored in the smoke. This definitely made it lose its translucent, smoky effect and gave it a very vibrant, dark green effect, which I didn't mind, but it just kind of threw off the overall balance of the drawing. Because the color was so dark and concentrated, that was the part that I ended up focusing on more when I looked at the overall drawing, and that's not what I wanted in a drawing that's not about the smoke, but about the lady that's standing there, representing poison. So in order to combat that, I decided to add it into her skin and her body, and this kind of led to more panic. When I added it into her body, it just didn't look like it fit because the color that I used before was more of a muddy green and this was such a vibrant green, it felt like it just didn't mix together and I thought I messed up completely. So even though I didn't like this choice, I still went along with it because the only other option would be to start over. So I added it into the skin, and this really darkened the overall skin slash scale tone and lessened the contrast between her hair and the skin. However, I will say that the lime green color on her did make her feel more toxic or poisonous, so that was a plus. But because there was a lack of contrast, I couldn't do the gradient in her hair like it was before. I tried to darken it with the watercolor that I used before, which was kind of like that muddy brown green. However, it wasn't dark enough. So because of that, I ended up choosing a black water brush pen in order to add that contrast back in. The black definitely added the contrast that I wanted, but it took away that murky color of the hair that I also wanted. So because I also didn't have a solid color scheme planned out, I think when I went off track and I kind of added in something new and unexpected, it really threw off what my original idea was. However, I don't think that it was a bad thing. The drawing itself went in a direction that I wasn't expecting, and it ended up being more vibrant than the previous image where it was more of a murky, muddy green. It ended up not being exactly what I planned for, but sometimes mistakes can really push a drawing in another direction and make you see things differently, or also help you with your art problem solving skills, where you try to figure out how to combat this mistake instead of trashing the whole drawing and starting again. You can use different techniques to either hide it or incorporate it into the drawing and make it successful just in a different way. So I feel like this drawing really challenged me on that part because usually I have a color scheme ready to go, so I know what color I wanted, and I had a vague one and I knew what colors I wanted, but that lime green really threw me off. So I ended up changing the whole thing completely, and making her hair black was something that I was not planning to do. I wanted to keep it that gradient color, but because her skin was so dark with the lime green, it ended up being too much of the same tone that would make it blend into each other, which is not what I wanted. So I hope that little overview of showing the process of how I deal with mistakes was helpful, and hopefully gave you guys some ideas on how to deal with something unexpected when it comes to drawing or painting. I hope it encouraged you to incorporate the mistakes or the unexpected into the drawing instead of starting over completely new. So now that I'm done talking about mistakes, let's just go ahead and talk about the line art, which is the last part. There's not too much to cover in this area just because you guys kind of know the drill. I basically line it with the Artline fine liners, but this time I did use a thicker pen. I used the 05 instead of the 03 and below, and this definitely gave it a more heavy look just because the thickness of the outline was so thick compared to previous ones, and the contrast between the black and her green skin really showed. So that about wraps up the process of this drawing. Like I said before, this drawing didn't really turn out the way that I was expecting. So that about wraps up this elemental. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. Keep drawing, keep painting, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!